participation, we will do so. So we are live, and good evening, good morning, depending from where you're watching from, and welcome to the first climate roundtable organized and conducted by the Climate Strategic Working Group of the left in the European Parliament. As the Green Left and our work on climate is climaxing, entering in this decade of delivery and facing the climate crisis, and being very, very busy in the European Parliament implementing the Green Deal and pushing through the climate law and all the relevant legislation and regulations that follow the reduction of emissions to 55%. We have initiated a series of monthly broadcasts discussing thematics, different themes around the many aspects of climate action, ranging from climate justice to energy communities. And each event is going to be organized and hosted by an MEP. My name is Petros Kokalis. I am an MEP elected in Greece, and I am with Syriza Progressive Alliance and the left, of course, in the European Parliament. And I have the honor to present the first discussion on alternative measures to GDP, the general question about GDP and how we are measuring progress, how we are deciding policies and making decisions. First, I would like to thank and present our guest speakers today. First, Mrs. Rebecca Humphries, a Senior Public Affairs Officer with WWF from European Policy Office, and she's going to be talking to us about a very important report produced by WWF recently towards an EU well-being economy, a fairer, more sustainable Europe post-COVID-19. Thank you, Rebecca, for being with us today. And also Dr. Roberto Tapia, Senior Researcher and Policy Specialist with the United Nations Development Program and part of the team that produces the Human Development Index and Human Development Reports, the landmark report that's produced yearly by the United Nations Development Program. And as it so happens, we are very privileged to have him today with us, because yesterday we had the publication of the 30th report titled The Next Frontier, Human Development in the Anthropocene. So we're very privileged to have Roberto with us. Just a short introduction on the format. We are going to have short introductions and hopefully followed by a discussion. We aim to keep this short and juicy and to the point, which means less than 1 hour of your precious time. The idea of talking about the GDP is really talking about the elephant in the room, and it's a very big elephant. That is the fact that for the past maybe 80 years, the way that we measure human progress is by a very limited metric, which is the basically the amount of production that an economy can produce in a year, a given time a year, which is problematic in many ways. Most importantly, that it has led that we cannot really monitor and value what really matters, which is health, nature, education, and our communities. It has been likened to the cuckoo in the nest, which falsely alarms the birds and hijacks the reason for the bird to feed the plants. So there has been a growing push in the past few years to move beyond GDP, to arrive at a metric that really mirrors progress as we understand it, and more so, but increasingly in the past years, but especially now during the COVID-19 pandemic and in our efforts for a green recovery, we need to know where that public money produces public goods. and this cannot only be reflected in the strictly economic value of the GDP. It is now well understood by all parties involved, but that sustainability is defined as the space where we can combine the idea of prosperity with the possibility of social progress within the planetary boundaries. So this is a very fine line, which is not at all measured by the GDP. So a lot of different systems and metrics have been introduced and discussed. We have seen recently the famous donut economics, where these metrics have been a lot reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals approach. Sustainable Development Goals, of course, the Sustainable Development Agreement is the twin document to the Paris Agreement. In the Paris Agreement, we shoot for the reduction of emissions, but the political program, a program which shoots for reducing inequalities and really leaving no one behind while we transition into a climate neutral world, remains to be incorporated. The European Union has adopted it by its Council in October 2019, and the Commission has declared it to be in the center of its efforts for economic development and growth. However, we have seen it introduced in the European semester, a process of economic monitoring, of which, of course, we're not very fond at the left, but however, introducing the Sustainable Development Goals in the European semester is at least a serious move towards going beyond GDP, but there's a lot to be done in this effort. Of course, the SDGs have the immense advantage that they are a common language, and given the urgency of the challenge to arrive at climate neutrality in 2050 and the reduction of 2030, and do it in an inclusive, social inclusive and just way, requires a common language, a common understanding, and requires evidence-based policy. It requires a language where we politicians can show to our constituents that we achieve progress in specific words. And the magic of the SDGs is that they hold equally for states, national governments, subnational governments, regional governments, cities, towns, villages, companies, private businesses, public operations, communities, schools, hospitals, homes, and also the first, let's say, universal metric language. So we really support the introduction of the meaningful incorporation of the SDGs in all the policy making of the European Union. And we have now the discussion of better regulation. We're expected to see what the Commission has done about it. We're really pushing, and in this effort, we had the great opportunity to have the WellBeing Economy report, which reviews all relevant efforts to go beyond GDP and how to introduce them in the European Union policy-making dialogue. And I will now give the floor to, well, not the floor, the screen to Rebecca to go ahead and share her screen and talk to us about the well-being economy. Please send us your comments and questions on the little boxes below your screen. Rebecca, the screen is yours.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you very much, Petros, and thank you for having me on this roundtable to present our EU Wellbeing Economy reports. So yeah, I'm going to pick up on quite a few elements that you already mentioned. So indeed, for the past 80 years or so, well, basically since the end of the Second World War, GDP has been used by political leaders and policymakers as the headline measure for how well our economies and societies are doing. And this has led on decision makers to focus on it to the detriment of other aspects of our lives. So this has kind of often resulted in the focus on short-term gains rather than long-term considerations like leaving a healthy environment to future generations. So at the same time as we've really seen this acceleration and this growth in GDP, we've also seen an acceleration like never before of the depletion of our natural world. So I'll just move to the next slide, and you can see actually that it's pretty much the same curve for everything, whether it's GDP growth or emissions, biodiversity loss, deforestation, etc. So these numbers have reached unprecedented figures now, and they have irreversible consequences. And this is why we consider that we need to change our paradigm. And I think we're all aware of these issues, and we're all aware of these problems. And policies have been adopted over the years to address some of these environmental issues, but the trends continue worsening. And what 2020 has done as well, I think, is broadened awareness that an indicator like GDP is not capturing the complexities of what's going on in our societies. And so while this has been known by many of us for quite a while, I think it's really been driven home this year. So maybe just bringing it back to the limitations of GDP as an indicator. In our report, we set out what we see as really the five main limitations. So GDP fails to account properly for the depletion of natural resources as it concentrates on annual flows and not on stocks. So for example, a forest being cut down is counted as a positive for GDP and not taking into account the loss of failing to sustain that forest. GDP also counts negative externalities like pollution or water scarcity, accidents, as a positive when they force spending for the repair of those externalities. So rather than actually preventing those externalities from happening in the first place. And then it fails to account for actually positive externalities that have no market price, like volunteering or ecosystem services or household labor. And it also fails to account for inequalities in our societies, and it ignores the limits beyond which an increase in GDP is actually no longer contributing to an increase in quality of life. So for example, by driving overconsumption. So what can actually be done? Well, I think alternatives to policy making based on economic growth exist. They're becoming more tangible. And the idea of a well-being economy in particular has received growing attention in recent years. So what is a well-being economy? Well, very simply, it starts from the idea that public interests should determine economics and not the other way around. Rather than pursuing economic growth through a narrow indicator like GDP, well-being economy monitors and values what truly matters. So health, nature, education, etc., etc. Several countries are already moving to this approach, aiming to transform their policies and decision-making processes towards delivering well-being. So, for example, the WellBeing Economy Governments Partnership, made up of New Zealand, Scotland, Iceland, and Wales, are already shifting to this approach. They're adopting well-being budgets, for example. And what we're calling for is for the EU to start shifting to a well-being economy. So how can the EU do this? And you can see on your screen a few examples that we are recommending. So first of all, shifting the narrative by setting well-being, climate neutrality, nature protection as the primary objectives for our societies. starting to use beyond GDP indicators as measurements of progress and as measurements to decide on policies by adopting a more comprehensive dashboard of beyond GDP indicators. So actually I can show you an example from our report that we put together, which is a sort of a comparison of different EU member states alongside different indicators. So you have GDP there, but also the Gini index that measures inequality, the Human Development Index that we'll hear more about very soon. And you see that there's a very different picture that emerges depending on, well, that shows that success in one metric doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing well on another. And so we think that we need more nuance and more information for policymakers to take decisions. And then we also need a think sustainability first approach to set sustainable development as the primary objective for all policy making, and also an increase in political accountability and public participation in the design of policies. And as Petros indicated, we are starting to hear more and more voices that are calling for this shift at EU level. So earlier this year, the European Economic and Social Committee called for the EU to adopt a well-being economy strategy. The Council last year, under the Finnish presidency, adopted Council conclusions calling for the Commission to come forward with a communication on the well-being economy. President von der Leyen herself has mentioned in the State of the Union speech that there are limits to a model that values wealth above well-being. So there is momentum that is being built. And I think the European Parliament has a key role to play here. It can call on it can add to the voices that are calling for the European Commission to come forward with proposals for shifting to a well-being economy and for developing that framework of well-being indicators to receive priority when taking decisions. And there are several opportunities already where it can start to integrate these calls. So one of the immediate ones is the proposal for an 8th Environment Action Programme. We see in the proposal that there's this attempt to include ill-defined concepts like regenerative growth as a way of continuing business as usual with a bit of greenwashing on top. And we would much rather see the inclusion of a narrative that calls for a shift to a well-being economy within planetary boundaries. And as I showed before, we would like to see the development of a new dashboard of well-being indicators, which integrates all of the existing relevant monitoring frameworks for a more coherent and streamlined monitoring of progress on all of the EU's key priorities. So that's it from me for now. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for this presentation. And I think that the discussion in the European Union is progressing, and that the European Parliament needs to raise a voice into supporting the Commission into integrating this alternative measurements that measure what really matters, especially now with the recovery plan. But I think we can keep the discussion and the questions for later. I'm very happy to give the screen over to Roberto Tapia, Dr. Tapia. As you might have already guessed, I'm not an economist by training, and in many ways this discussion is a quest to move away from the tyranny of economics in a one-sided way. But Roberto is a doctor of economics from Columbia University, and we're very happy to have him with us today, one day after the publication of the Human Development Report of 2020, the 30th, to presented to us and shared his thoughts about moving beyond GDP. Roberto.
Thank you very much, Petros. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Congratulations also for the initiative. We presented the 2020 Human Development Report yesterday, Human Development and Anthropocene, the new frontier. I'm very happy that Rebecca touched some of the underlying elements motivating this report. In some of her figures, there was a line in the 1950, which is the date where some scientists are saying the humanity is starting a new geological epoch. Actually, it's for the planet, which is called the Anthropocene, which is an epoch where humans have become a driving geological force. So this is broadly the context, and what we claim in this report is we need to rethink completely the way we talk about development, and that includes self-criticism to revisit our own conception of human development. So I will start talking about the history because I think it's important. The first human development came in 1990, with the first Human Development Index, and there was clarity precisely about the point that GDP wasn't a good indicator, and there was a big statement: people are the real wealth of nations. But then the question was, then what do we do? So there was a big discussion at that time between the head of the office, Mahbub ul Haq, and Amartya Sen, the big economist, Nobel Prize winner. And this is actually in one of the first pages of this report. Amartya Sen writes this story. And the key was, what do? We do a composite index or a dashboard. So Amartya Sen was supporting the idea of the dashboard. He was saying that it was impossible to have an index who would give us, who would do justice to this idea that people were the real wealth of nature with all the different dimensions of life. So he was saying, you must see how vulgar this imagined single number must be in terms of trying to represent simultaneously so many distinct features of life. And the response of Mahbub ul Haq was, people will pay tribute to the excellence of your multiple components. He was talking about the dashboard. But when it comes to ready use, they will abandon your complicated world and choose the single GDP number instead. So I think that is the challenge. He saw the challenge and the benefit of having a single number, even though he knew it was a vulgar representation of reality. So then the Human Development Index was created with adding to GDP per capita, now it's GNI per capita, indicators of education and health. But in addition, there was a complex, the office presented since then a set of tables and dashboards because that was what we wanted to talk about. So this is how everything started. And now where we are. So we are entering the Anthropocene. We see that the world has changed a lot. As Rebecca pointed out, the effect of people on the planet is great. And we see this now very clearly in development impact. So wildfires, hurricanes, and we see evidence about declining in wildlife and the number of species, and certainly the pandemic. Let me show you just a quick glance of what this is the change in the Human Development Index over the last 30 years, and you can see how deep is the decline for this year. But by the way, in order to get an idea of the decline in human development, we had to make some changes to the index because sometimes statistics cannot, in the way they are originally constructed, cannot account for the effects that we want to capture. So this is certainly a big problem, and it's in a way, a glimpse of what can be coming more frequently. Let me also show you this figure about what was happening even before the COVID-19 crisis. So hunger that had been declining for decades had started to rise again. And we see the projections for the next decade, and certainly the COVID-19 worsened things, but things are going bad. And certainly the factor that is behind this are the consequences of the pressures on the planet. So it's this is a new element that it's arising. But this is getting worse. So the report presents evidence that in the countries that are the poorer countries, the countries with low human development, the number of extra days of extreme temperature could be 100 more by the end of the century. So that's huge. Think about a year of 30, 65 days, 100 more in the poorer countries. In the case of the richer countries, in general, there will be actually a decrease because of the warning, the coldest days are going to be going down. A problem is that even if we do the right thing and we do a mitigation, in the poorest countries, we will have still 50 more days of extreme weather. So this is going to be bad, even if we do what we are supposed to do to meet the Paris Agreement. And certainly this is going to make a difference. It's going to cut in half, but we need to be prepared to do more, but also to be prepared for some bad outcomes in the next decades. So what is the problem? Basically, that countries as developed, they put a lot of pressures on the planet. So in this figure, we see in the horizontal axis, the Human Development Index reflecting development, how we are defining it. And in the vertical axis, a measure of material footprint per capita. So the pressure on the planet, this reflects the destruction of natural resources, is going up with the level of development. And we have here some countries that are in these two boxes in a sustainable status, but with low level development. But when they go to high development, the other box, they are clearly in an unsustainable situation. So what we don't have is countries where in this empty box. This is the box where we want to be, with high human development, but without high pressures on the planet. And so, but we claim that it's possible to get there if we plan for this. But the takeaway here is that we need new policies to get to the empty box, but also we need to be sincere. The Human Development Index is not enough because precisely it's not taking account of this additional dimension. So in the report, we present a deep analysis about what is underlying the process and how we have failed to find our place in the planet, and how social imbalances and planetary imbalances are intimately connected. And so I'm not going to go into this, but I think this is an important discussion that we need to tackle. It's complex, though. And and also we highlight that the new approaches have to put a lot of emphasis on equity and innovation and in the stewardship of nature, and we discuss policies in this area. But then, how do we do it? So in practical terms, how we move ourselves into this empty box? And let's come back to the original question. So, do we need new measures? But if we need new measures, what do we do? Dashboard or composite index? And so what we decided to do is somehow come back to the initial discussion. We had this discussion throughout a year with different experts, and somehow these 2 points were pretty clear. So it's hard to come up with a single index that reflects the complexity of the moment we are living in. It's important to have a broad view of the different elements interplaying, and the complexity is important. However, we thought, and our advisors thought, that it was important to summarize things in a single index that we could use as the entry point for policy. So we developed what we call the Planet Adjusted Human Development Index, which is an index that corrects the Human Development Index by the pressures on the planet, which are measured using material footprint per capita and also carbon dioxide per capita. And the index, you can see this, the comparison in the horizontal axis, Human Development Index, in the vertical axis, the Planet Adjusted Human Development Index. You see that countries that among the developed countries, those who exert more pressure on the planet are somehow penalized in this index. And also we see a new image of development coming out of this. So somehow we are not as developed as we thought, because we were not taking care of one important part, which was the planet and nature. And second, in countries that are developing and are not developing as fast as we thought. So hopefully this is going to help us to rethink our development processes, our policies, and how we move forward. But again, we are including new dashboard because we think this is important. The index is, some people say, the entry point. It's like the door in a house. The house is, we have dashboard and we have analysis, we have explanations. The index is what gets us into this conversation. I'm going to stop here. Over.
Thank you very much, Roberto. You stopped where it was getting really exciting. I must say that I'm fascinated by this discussion and your willingness to rethink the way that we view development. I think it's very central at this point. It's a point where the whole of the world is doing it and should be doing it. And it is quite painfully, I would say, deadly obvious that the means of development and the direction of development has been catastrophic, and we know that as a science. So it's very much like Amartya Sen to discuss a single number as vulgar, but it's also makes sense that why it is useful. So I would like to ask you a question again, since you structured your presentation between a composite index and a dashboard. I spoke earlier about the need for a global language and the idea that the Sustainable Development Goals do provide a comprehensive global evidence-based language, but they are a dashboard, and they come from another part of the United Nations than the United Nations Development Program. So can you talk a little bit about the of course, you indicated that an index is an entry point, but how does your composite index reflect on the SDGs? Would somebody measuring his country or his city in SDG and an SDG dashboard find herself on the same place if he was measuring on the composite index?
Yes, so yeah, exactly. This is where the conversation gets interesting, because we think that this new experimental index, this Planet Adjusted Human Development Index, combines some elements that are critical. On the one hand, we have the traditional human development. This is in itself something that reflects a wide variety of outcomes. So what we need in order to get good education, what we need in order to get good health, what we need to get more better living standards, these are very connected with many of the sustainable development indicators. So somehow we get there a lot of very precious information that I think it's very important in daily life of people. We can, there are things that are not there, but I think get us started. And in addition to that, I think we were very selective in including two key elements of the pressure on the planet. So the carbon dioxide emissions. So we need a transformation in energy. We need energy, but we need to get it in a clean way. And on the other hand, the material footprint per capita. So, and what is important is that we are analyzing in the report some of the elements that are behind this. And for instance, one of them that is very crucial is equity. So one of the big dynamics, the stabilizing dynamic, is that we have a very unequal world. And this happens, this matters for relationship between countries. For instance, we document that very clearly that countries, that richer countries are benefiting from the environment in a disproportionate way and are getting very little of the cost that they are producing. And the opposite is true in the developing world. So, and of course, this is a destabilizing dynamic because the incentives that they continue doing this. But also this happens at the local level, where you can see in our countries how some local communities are somehow experiencing a lot of climate injustice or environmental injustice because they are polluted, and they have very little space to act on that, while wealthier communities are exporting their waste to the poorer areas. So I think the issue of equity is really fundamental to address this, and this again is a core element within the SDGs. And I'm going to stop here because I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but just to give you an example how when we start talking about this index, we immediately jump into very complex and rich areas for policy. Over.
Thank you very much. I have a further question, but I would like to get back to you, Rebecca. And knowing that a lot of your chapters have been very active, your country chapters have been very active into coming up with critiques of the recovery plans, of the national recovery plans. And we have a very strong demand in the European Union that the recovery funds do produce more equity, do take into account the planetary boundaries, and that the fiscal stimulus and the public stimulus and the public money is indeed used to produce, to build back better, to grow forward better, and producing a more equal and a more sustainable world. Do you have an overview of these critiques? I'm very familiar with the one in Greece, and it's really the best plan that we have in Greece. It's quite better than the one that the government produced, and it's the one that really touches upon specific measures on how to finance organic agriculture, nature-based solution, adaptation, which is a very serious problem to finance. Do you, as you sit in the Brussels office, do you see a lot of these reports coming from different countries?
Yeah, absolutely. So our national organizations have been active on this question, but as you mentioned, I think there are different circumstances in every member state that mean that the overviews are going to be different from one member state to another. I think from a Brussels level perspective, what we're afraid of is that there's a growing disconnect between the rhetoric around these recovery plans, which is very good. You know, it's all about the green recovery, and then what we actually see in practice. And I think this, on the one hand, is a sort of a consequence of the fact that this whole process has been very rushed in a way that is understandable, because we are in quite an unprecedented situation. But that situation has led, I think, to a lack of time for civil society organizations and also decision makers to fully scrutinize what is being included in these recovery plans. And there's a real risk that some very harmful activities end up being subsidized through these recovery plans. So continuing to sort of lock in harmful subsidies to fossil fuels for decades to come, when we should much rather be looking at ways that we can finance the green transition. So it's a very important question that we'll need to be very vigilant about in the months to come, both at Brussels level and also, as you said, at national and local level.
Thank you. Well, talking of national levels, I can't, I can't contain myself, Roberto, but notice that you are from Chile, and Chile is, of course, very famous for having been in the forefront in introducing neoliberal policies back in the days where the word was didn't even existed, and in that way, really putting all its eggs on the basket, putting all its efforts in having the market direct development. And it seems, judging from the actions of the Chilean people in the past few months, that this did not go down well with equity, and probably not also with the national resources. So given that the United Nations Development Programme is undertaking a fantastically important and very smart job to help over 100 countries produce national voluntary reviews for the Glasgow that was to happen a few months ago, that is going to happen in the next year, and the critical year for increased ambition. So as the United Nations Development Programme is helping the countries produce almost 100 green deals, and we have a green deal happening now, or expecting to have one, a very important one in the United States of America, and one in Europe. What, in the end of the day, is the measurement that we need to use to ensure that we have a real social and green New Deal, one that is looking for helping real people and not on just numbers?
Thank you. Well, many things in the question. So in terms of the measurement, I think we need to keep this dual approach. So to find some to define some targets along some very simple indicators, like the one we are proposing, this planet adjusted human development index. This is important to get it started. So now, for instance, is a little bit of publicity, but in Wikipedia, you have the human development, the GDP per capita, and right below you have the human development index. And I think this is a big victory to show things in a different way. Countries start to care about it, governments care about it if they go down in the ranking. So hopefully these new metrics get us there, allow us to start talking about these topics that otherwise we cannot talk about, right? So I think that's the first step. But we need to keep a deeper analysis. And your point about Chilean inequalities is really important, because certainly it's a country that has where inequality is very big. We have had, even before the COVID-19 crisis, a lot of protests that were reflecting the unsustainability of the model. People were asking for something different. So now, and this was not happening only in Chile. We had a wave of protests in the world in many different countries, and somehow it was the same underlying thing. These were not, in general, very poor people asking for the minimum. These were young people, but all types of people that were we had reached some level of well-being, but they were feeling that things were not working for them. And so that tension is still there. And now we are saying, well, now we have to develop in a different way. So for some, this means maybe we are risking the development pathways going forward. So I think we need to face this, and what we are proposing, and I think this is more or less what also Rebecca was talking about, is that we have a way forward, which is investing more, to think differently, redistributing resources, because people are willing to do things in a different way. They are willing to promote clean energies. They're willing to invest in the planet, but they need the power to do it. So I think there are multiple examples, and just let me give you one. In the case of indigenous people, so they even with the small resources they have done enormous contributions to the planet. But what we have in exchange for them, a lot of persecution, extreme poverty. So if we just give them a little bit more respect for human rights, resources, I think we could take advantage of that. So there are many areas in which if we think differently, if we empower people, we can achieve at the same time more progress, and we're going to be taking care of the planet.
We certainly hope in the left in the European Parliament that that the European Union is taking a shift towards a more progressive and more equitable society by implementing the leave no one behind and do no harm oath in the Green Deal. So I would like to ask you, Rebecca, what, because I've seen in your report, what going back from economic theory to an economic analysis to policy, your recommendation, what do you recommend that the Parliament should be doing to push the implementation and the integration of the Sustainable Development Goals into real policy?
Thank you. Yes, so there are many things that can be done, and that I'm looking forward to seeing action on in the coming months. So our feeling is that some of the actions on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals has slowed a little bit in the past few months, and so there's a need for rebuilding some of that momentum. So the European Parliament has always been a big champion pushing for more mechanisms to be put forward and developed by the European Union to track progress towards the SDGs. So, I mean, starting off, I think recently we saw the publication by the European Commission of a staff working document on the SDGs. In this staff working document, the Commission committed to taking a whole of government approach to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, but it didn't really detail how that would work in practice. So this is something that the parliaments could clearly call for, either in a resolution or a report. So on the one hand, then there is also the need to achieve policy coherence for sustainable development. And this is also something that was touched upon in this Commission document. One of the upcoming opportunities there to push for this is the reform of the better regulation rules. So the better regulation rules, which are essentially how the Commission sort of develops the evidence to take its policy decisions on. Right now, I think that there's a clear imbalance between the different dimensions of sustainable development. So there are a lot of tools to assess economic impacts. There's only one tool to assess climate impacts. So not even other environmental impacts like biodiversity loss or resource use. And there are also very few tools for assessing social impacts. So the development of more tools by the European Commission to assess the sort of the full impacts on sustainable development that their policies have would be needed. And I think this is also something that the European Parliament can call for in response to that better regulation communication. Perhaps I'll stop there to not take too much time. But our EU Wellbeing Economy report that you mentioned has quite a lot of these recommendations, and I would be happy to share it with anyone that's interested. So don't hesitate to get in touch, and I can send you the link.
Thank you, and we'll stay in touch for that. But I would like to have a final comment from both of you, for if anybody prefers to go first, and that is the connection between the rule of law and human development. We had a landmark decision by the European Council last week, and the European Parliament in this plenary saluted it, that we cannot use public money without respect of rule of law. So I was wondering, because I have seen democracy indexes. Of course, democracy is a polity in flux. It's not something that is stabilized and can easily be measured. But how do we incorporate the idea of the rule of law and human rights within the indexes of human development? And that's an open question, because I know that it's close to both of your hearts.
Maybe I'll go first. Well, this is something that we are continuously monitoring. I think there are two elements to this. So we have in our report a dashboard monitoring the human rights in terms of countries adhering to them. So that's one important part. But then there is the other question about how this in practice is working. And for this, I think we need to be courageous to check whether things are moving in the right direction or not, beyond what some governments might be saying. So, and in every report, we try to include some analysis about this. In this report, I think the key element that we are bringing is about human rights for indigenous people, because I think in the context of the climate crisis, this is what appears as the most remarkable element in this equation. So it's not only bad, it's a horrible signal for the type of change we want to promote. So hopefully this is going to help to get a broader conscious about the importance of indigenous peoples in development. And this start with human rights, but goes beyond, because it's about valuing their contribution to knowledge, and they're valuing the different elements of their role in society. But certainly the broader space of rule of law is very fundamental. Over.
Rebecca?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a very important point that often gets overlooked, is how important good governance is to good environmental outcomes. And this is something that we really see in our work across Europe and across the world. I think where there is not good implementation, I mean, you can have the best environmental laws on the planet, but if they're not being properly implemented, if there's not ways of recourse, if you see that there are breaches, then those laws are going to be worthless. So this is a very important area of work for us, and we have worked on this a lot in the context of asking the EU to do more on infringements related to environmental breaches. It's also very important for our work, because where the rule of law is is being threatened, it's very difficult for civil society to speak up and to play its role. So this is really something that that is very important to WWF's work globally, and absolutely something that needs to be taken into account when considering different metrics of progress.
Well, thank you for talking about the metrics of progress. Thank you both for being with us in this broadcast. It was a pleasure to meet you, Roberto, and to talk to you again, Rebecca, and have this discussion. I think that this new report by the United Nations Development Program highlighting how planetary and social imbalances reinforce each other, it comes at a very timely moment where we have this opportunity to steer this recovery towards building a better world. So I would like to thank you very much for being with us in this very first climate roundtable organized by the Climate Strategic Working Group of the left in the European Parliament. And stay tuned. Next month, we're going to talk about climate justice. And as for now, again, thank you for being with us. Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, a better New Year, and stay safe. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.